Have you ever met or interacted with those leaders that you instantly see how extraordinary they are at their job, but at the same time, you feel extraordinary around them? You see them exceed in accomplishing things and moving up, and at the same time, they're lifting other people up in the process. They're the kind of people that when you sit down with them, you feel completely seen and heard, and you watch them producing results that you really admire and you want to produce yourself. Well, that's a likable badass. And today I have the privilege to be able to interview Alison Fragale, who is a UNC Business School professor, has a PhD from Stanford, went to Dartmouth, and is just an extraordinary and kind human being and a likable badass. And today I got an opportunity to be able to sit down with her and dig in and interview her about her upcoming book, Likable Badass. So don't miss this one. She gives some great tips. She defines what it is, helps explain the difference between power and status and why status is even more important. And how do we create that? How do we get that status? How do we earn that status and be the kind of person that people want to lift up, that people want to support, and who makes a difference in the world at the same time? So don't miss this interview. It's great. And now let's jump into my interview with Alison Fragale. Well, Alison Fragale is a Mary Farley Ames Lead Distinguished Scholar of Organizational Behavior at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and is a research psychologist, award-winning professor, international keynote speaker, and author. She has a mission to help especially women use behavioral science to work and live better. Her scholarship has been published in the most prestigious academic journals in the field, featured in prominent media outlets like the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. And really what this all says is that she is a likable badass herself. And I got connected with Alison, I don't know, maybe it was a year ago or so when you were doing research for this book. You were looking at the role of compliments and recognition and accepting them. And you had reached out. We started the conversation, and we have just been connected ever since. And I'm just excited to have you on and to talk about your new book. So thank you for
I
joining.
I am so excited to be here too. And maybe we'll get into it, but I actually like to think about this as the book that LinkedIn wrote because just like you, so many of the people who end up featured in here are people that I have never met in person, that I have made connections with through relationships in social media. And I just actually think that's cool and speaks to the value we can all get, even when we're not face to face.
Well, and the ability, and I know something you talk a lot about is about creating those networks and creating those mentors and keeping those relationships. And I think people not realizing you have the ability to take that digital relationship and make it a real relationship when you reach out to make those connections. So, Alison, what sparked you to write this book in the first place?
So I've been a professor for 20 years. I don't know if I had a childhood dream. It certainly wasn't that, but I end up here. I'm an organizational psychologist. I'm teaching negotiation and influence to lots of audiences, MBA students, professionals at work. And not surprisingly, most of my audiences at the time have more men in them than women.
Mhm.
But there's always that line at the podium afterward of people who want to line up and ask you a question. And I noticed that the lines were always mostly women. And they were lining up to say, I've got a problem. Either I'm trying to negotiate for myself to get more pay or advancement, I'm getting resistance, I'm not being valued in the place where I am, I feel like I need to move. These kind of typical challenges. And what it made me realize was that women had challenges that men didn't, and that they weren't getting answers in other places. And I felt uniquely set up to serve women. One, living this experience myself and having to use my knowledge of behavioral science to try to solve my own problems. And I said, well, I could try to do that to solve other people's problems as well. So I started taking the research that I was doing, the research that I was aware of, and offering it to women specifically to say, hey, yeah, we do have some challenges that other people might not, but we also have in our disposal a lot of science and strategies that give us a good amount of control over a challenge we didn't deserve, but we can address. And that was the beginning. And so over time, although I always say I still speak to anyone who wants to talk about behavioral science to live their best life, I really love uniquely serving women and giving them these tools to say, whatever my challenge is, behavioral science can help me tackle it a little bit better.
Love that. And I think something you shared in the beginning there where you said is I was uniquely qualified. And you look at just the status things that come up in your resume as you went to Dartmouth, you went to Stanford, you got your PhD from Stanford, you speak at, you work at one of the top business schools. What were some of the things that you think helped you become the likable badass that you are, that got you to that place that makes you uniquely qualified to do what you do?
One is I was the beneficiary of some very, very good mentoring and advice at different points in my career. And one that really stands out is when I got to graduate school. I was still really young. I was 23. And I had a very successful senior advisor, a woman, who was really brilliant at thinking about status. She didn't study status as an academic, but she understood how to manage hers. She had come, 20 years before me, where she was a real trailblazer and outlier as a woman, and a business academic. And what she understood was how to add value to relationships in ways that are going to help you advance your own career. And when I got to graduate school, she started talking to me in a language of, here's how this is going to go down. You are going to start making other people's lives better. And that's your most important job right now. And I said, okay, I didn't know any better. I did what she told me. And I started building relationships with the academic community at large, finding ways that even though I was new and I didn't know a lot, I could add value. She said, someone needs you to make 1,000 copies on their research study. You're going to make it, and you're going to read the thing that you're copying, and then you're going to ask them questions about it, and then you're going to learn, and maybe you can add some value. So I started thinking about it this way. And so I was a beneficiary of really, really good advice. And it made me start thinking about something I think I was naturally intrigued by. I'd always loved psychology, of thinking, what is my audience thinking? And then how could I influence what they're thinking in a way that's going to help me achieve my goals? But the mentorship really helped me. And then it wasn't until I became a professor and people would do things like really dumb things. Like I'll just give you so one
Please.
time someone asked me, I'm sorry, I asked somebody, a student, a graduate student, if they would do me a favor and help out in one of my courses. They would get compensated, but time is probably more valuable than money. So they were going to spend some of their time. And the person said, no, I'm too busy. And I was disappointed by that. Okay.
Makes me
And
cringe.
right, I'm too busy. And I mean, I laughed. I was like, I would have never gotten away with that when I was a graduate student. But nevertheless, I'm too busy. But kid you not, the very next day, that same student sends me an email saying, would you mind sending me all of your teaching materials for this course that you're teaching? Because I have to teach a similar course and I would love to have your stuff as a starting point. And I did it, but I just thought, this is a moment, right? If you want to be in a reciprocal relationship with someone or you don't, you can't say no to a favor on day one and then on day two come back and say, can I have a favor from you? I mean, you can, but it's not increasing your likelihood of success or building your status. And so when I would see people do these things, I would think, didn't anybody give you the same lecture my advisor gave me? Because they would have told me that's not a wise move. And so as I realized a lot of people didn't have that kind of advice, it made me appreciate how much people early in my life, like to that point and beyond, had really helped me think very strategically about how relationships work and how to practice these things that are authentic but also really strategic.
Yeah, and I love it. And I think what's so clear is that you, just knowing you for the last year, is how much you live this in everything you do. Right. I remember like gave we talked for a few minutes and you sent me this like beautiful, likable, badass mug that's been sitting on my desk and I've been using it. And by the way, I think I've sold like 5 embers ever since. I think I bought one for my mom for Mother's Day out of it. But is that just lifting people up around you? Now, one thing that I thought that really stood out to me when you're talking, well, before we go to it, how do you define likable badass?
Okay. So it's my catchy term for a really important underlying psychological truth. And that is that when we look at people and we make judgments of them, just like they make judgments of us, the judgments we make aren't random. There's two dimensions of person perception that we pay attention to. So if you think there's a y-axis and an x-axis, we pay attention to what I call how assertive and capable people are. So are you competent, confident, decisive? If I give you stuff to do, are you going to deliver it well? And that's a valuable perception. If we think that someone is very capable, that bodes well for them. The other dimension is warmth. Do you care about people other than yourself? And that is, are you pleasant to be around? Do I enjoy you? Are you likable? But also, are you honest, sincere, helpful? And so those two dimensions are the two dimensions that we pay attention to when we think about evaluating a person. And again, non-conscious brain.
Mhm.
And so likable badass is my catchy term for these two dimensions. I always joke that I could have called the book The Interpersonal Circumplex of Person Perception, but I'm not sure anyone would have wanted to pick it up.
And it
So
would have had a cover that, had some kind of like 80s artist work on the front with a blue binding and would go in a library
yeah.
that never would, it'd be an academic journal.
100%. So that's where it comes from. Is it comes from the underlying science of what are the positive dimensions that influence how other people see us. So, and that quadrant is when I'm assertive and warm, that's the best place to be. It's where everyone wants to be. And it is the surefire recipe for success because if somebody sees you as capable and caring, they'll do whatever is in their power to help you out.
Okay, like 70 different questions just came off of that right there. I want to go to. So I want to go back on into something that you were talking about, is that the importance of status and power and the difference between the two. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is a big crux of the messages that I try to get across. What is status? Status is how much other people respect and regard you. So if you're highly respected, you say you have high status, less respected, lower status. That's what status is. Power is you control resources that matter, that other people value. So that could be I have the ability to give you a good performance review or a bad one. I can hire and fire. I can spend the budget without approval. If, I always say, if you have a teenager and you have the car keys, you have a resource they value. So therefore, you have power. And so that's the distinction.
Mhm.
Power is objectively something you hold. Status exists only in other people's minds. So it's all, you only have as much status as other people think you have.
They
It's their
claim.
decision on how much to respect and regard. But the consequences, even though it exists only in their head, are very, very real and very, very far reaching. So both status and power are what we call fundamental human needs. All people want them. And when you have them, life is better. And and so they both matter greatly. And therefore, with status, we see improvements in mental and physical health, life satisfaction, but also, and this is the really important point of why do I make that distinction, is because having status makes it so much easier to get power and to use your power effectively. And what I mean by that is if you don't value someone, you don't respect them, you don't see them as very capable, you don't see them as very caring, are you ever going to give them resources to control or control over you if you can help it? You never would. So status ends up being the fundamental baseline entry point into getting people to give us the resources. So they're not, although they're separate, they're not unrelated. And the status affects power much more so than the opposite, which is because a person controls resources, I'll respect them. It doesn't, not that it never happens, but that relationship isn't as strong. So the status first is a big soapbox of mine, is because if we can go and live a life where people really respect us, the other things in life that we also want just as much become a lot easier for us to get.
Well, in the factor. So one thing I was really present to is, as a white male, we moved out to the Middle East. And just being a white American male, it's already a step ahead everywhere in the world. But then I got out there and I would get hired as a speaker faster than other people because it was an assumption that as a white American male, I was bringing a perspective that was better than my colleague who was from the region. They could charge more for me, right? And immediately when I walk into a room, immediately, and I still remember when I was working at the Center for the Prevention of Hate Violence, my boss had a PhD and she was from Cape Verde. She had a PhD, was at Bowdoin, everything like that. And we would walk into the room and the principal would look to me as the 22-year-old white male and not make eye contact with her because the assumption that I was the boss. And I would have to, I remember it was a thing. I'm like, what do you want me to do? She's like, just look over to me and we'll redirect their attention. But she immediately had to establish that her status, where status was instantly given to me. So yeah, talk about that a little bit. Like,
That's true. Okay, so how much people respect you is based on a lot of stuff. there are what we call ascribed status characteristics, meaning you inherit them, they have no meaning, but we give them meaning. Gender is one, race is one, but there are others. Appearance, accent, ethnicity, religion, all kinds of things allow us to draw conclusions about how much we value somebody. And certainly, being white and being male is a high status, a set of ascribed characteristics. And you saw that in your situation, even though you didn't have the age, you didn't have the experience, you didn't have the title, you still have
Instantly, I am seen as the boss.
that's right.
Walking in.
And that's what I want. And so that's a disadvantage that women don't deserve and they essentially just inherit. But it is something we can navigate because if we look at the science of status, what we find is that how people behave ends up trumping anything about their demographics. So if I show up in a room and I show up in a way that shows the audience, I'm very capable and I'm very caring, I can get them thinking about those qualities and not really about my gender. But it means I have to be a little more proactive and strategic than somebody who has inherited better status. It is more work. So there's no way around it. It's more work because it's not baseline, but it's not so much work that you can't do it authentically with joy and still in a busy day where you're not thinking about it all the time. And I think this example you just shared I'm hearing it for the first time. It has in it something I would recommend, which is sometimes, right? Even though, again, we don't deserve this, what you might need to do is ask somebody else to build your status for you. And so in saying, turn to me and acknowledge me, that's a way of saying, you have a position to build my status. You're going to do it. And if you keep doing that, eventually people will recognize, right, that I'm the authority. And is it annoying that I have to ask you for that? Yes, but it'll work. And so asking for other people to help use their status to build ours is incredibly effective. I do it a lot in my own life. I've gotten great results out of it. And guess what? People like to do it because people who value you always want to help you. But if you tell them specifically what you want, it's the whole thing like in marriage. It's like, can you just tell me if you want me to take out the garbage? And rather than like be annoyed that I didn't take out the garbage, that would just be how people want you to tell them, do that thing. And they're like, oh, that was easy. Oh, and you really valued it? Great. Like, I'm happy to help you. So I think that's why you got that treatment, is that gender and race were essentially be taken as markers of status, and that we needed something else to override them, some opportunity for her to say, no, pay attention here. I'm the capable and caring one and build my status. And the quicker you do that in a relationship, the easier it is. So if they had spent 3, 4, 10 meetings looking at you, and then you try to do it, you can do it, but it'd be better if the very first time someone walked in the room, right, you turned your head and she took over. That's a little easier to shape a reputation than to change it 6 months in. And that's one of the things I try to counsel people on, is because I'm sure this is true for you, right? No one wants to call you till they're in trouble and then they've got a problem and then they call you and they want you to fix it. And you're like, I can give you a little help, but I wish you would have called me 6 months ago because I would have been able to help you a lot more rather than try to dig you out of this hole that you're now in where someone doesn't value you.
Yeah. Alison, so two things that just came up there. And so one, just kind of to talk about that, supporting others. I'm married to a extreme likable badass who has navigated her career, and I've got 2 sisters that are the same, and my daughter is a likable badass already at 8 years old. And one thing I noticed too is that I tend to be hypersensitive of those dynamics, and so we'll go to a dinner party and my wife will ask a question or say something, and then the person, if it's a male or a spouse, will then talk to me, and so I have to redirect the attention to be able to do it, of that, like but I'm being conscious of it. And I'm aware of it. And the thing I thought is, going back to that student that you were talking about before, how do you because we can't navigate something we're not necessarily, we know it makes us uncomfortable. We know something's off, but how do you get people to start seeing the status and starting to seeing the game and the playing field that they're working in? How do you get people aware who are maybe younger, and even people who are just dealing with it, to start seeing it so that they know the playing field that they're in?
I think the first step is giving them a word for it and a label, that thing where there's some certain things that like other languages have words for or don't have words for. And you think once you can label it, then you can start to see it. So One of the things I really care about in the work and the book that I wrote is bringing status into the conversation, because I did a search when I was doing research for the book on places where people get info. So HBR, right, big source for this kind of stuff for practitioners. TED, a big source.
Mhm.
It's depending on a thing, 2 to 1, 7 to 1, 10 to 1, the amount of content that we're putting out that relates to power compared to the amount of content we're putting out that relates to status. We're not talking about it. So much so that when I wrote Likable Badass, I wanted the subtitle to be How Women Win the Status Game.
Mhm.
And my editor said something I think is very telling. She said that cannot be the subtitle because nobody knows what you mean by status. In fact, a question I get in every interview is, can you define status? And you cannot put things on covers of books that people don't understand. It's not, again, it's not a good way to promote a book. So I took that and I said, fine. But I think the underlying comment about it is very telling, which is we haven't discussed this. And so to answer your question, step one is give it a label. And then and people have told me this, and too, when I given them the book to read, they're like, now that I see it, I can't unsee it. I see it everywhere I go. All I did was give them a word, define it, give them some examples of what it looks like. And next thing you know, the non-conscious has become conscious. And that's a good starting point, is to recognize it. And then you get to decide what, if anything, you want to do about it for your own status or to help build other people's as well. And as the psychologist in me is really evangelical about giving people good information and very agnostic about what they do with it.
Mhm.
Because I think once you know what it is, I'm not telling you you need to act in any way. I'm not telling you you have a status problem. I'm not telling you you need more of it, but I'm telling you if you don't like where you are, or you want to help other people get somewhere, here's why you may not be having the results you want and what you could do about it.
Are you willing to actually do the work that's going to help you get where you want? It was really interesting. We had this, just a side family note. My daughter's playing soccer, didn't want to go to soccer camps this summer. Her team, everyone on the team is very good. And we went out on the field yesterday and we had a real conversation. Is like, if you want to earn this and you want to be on that team, this is what the work is going to look like. Right. And you're going to actually have to get out there. You're going to have to start sprinting. You're going to have to actually do ball drills. You're going to have to do this work if you want that status of being on that team and moving forward. It's going to be uncomfortable. And you need to understand it's not something that's just given to you. It's I don't know if this is right. Power is something that you can buy or acquire.
Correct.
Status,
That's right.
you have to earn.
That's right.
Right. Or,
That's right.
as a white male, I get given status just because of, there are some things, status that I'm given because of the perception in society. And if I had a British accent, it would even be, it's like certain things that people assume status.
That's right. The idea is that power you could steal, status still has to be given voluntarily. It may be given voluntarily based on your race or your gender, but people are still deciding that they're going to give it to you. There was nothing that you could do to force them. And that's a difference. And yeah, I mean, I'm having the same thing with my kids as we are watching the Olympics. And they're looking at like, this person's 17, this person's 19. And they keep asking me questions like, Mom, like if I went to the Olympics, would you get a tattoo of the Olympic rings? And I'm like, if any of you end up in the Olympics, I will get it on my face because at this point, I think I'm good. But the idea of, yeah, you decide, do you want to put the work in or not? And yeah, if once it's laid out and someone sees the path, and then they can either want to walk it or not. But the beauty of status is that there's not just one path to walk, meaning there's a general goal you have, which is you need to convince your audience that you are a very capable person who cares about other people. And when you do that, you will succeed. But there's not just one way to do that. There's lots of latitude you have in exactly how you show up that way. And that I think is also something that makes me feel very positive about the work that I do because it allows people to live authentic lives and not have to feel like they have to follow a recipe of doing things they hate doing, because I don't do that in my own life. And there's lots of things that work for other people. And I just think I'm not doing that. Like it would be miserable. And so I find my own ways that feel authentic to be able to show up that way.
So on my other screen right now, I have your bio page up. I think I can bring it up on here. And underneath, après skier, what is it, like early riser, slow runner? And I was like, I love that because you signal so much just by saying that. And also the fact that you like cheap coffee. I think I would have a problem with that one, but I do love 7-Eleven coffee. It's one of my favorites. Um, so one thing I want to start going into some of the things that people can do to maintain it. But there was a quote that a section in your book that I read that I just want to read now because it just really stood out to me and it captured so much. And it was, with status, we're not trying to beat other people, most certainly not other women. And our wins don't need to come at others' expense. In our in our context, to win means to overcome. Gender can be a source of status disadvantage, but it doesn't have to be. When we know the science and use it to enact strategies that remove gender as a barrier, we've won. And while we're winning, the women around us can win too. I love that. And I love that you pulled out the fact that status is not trying to beat other people. Because I think power is something that we're taught is I need to get power and I need to take power from you. And so what does it look like when I'm elevating my status and elevating other people at the same time?
Yeah. So, absolutely. So, okay. So elevating my own status is going to be anything I do that shows up in a way that gets people to see me as highly capable and caring. So, um, talking about our successes is a good example, but there's various ways we can do that. So one is simply talking about our successes is not as risky as we think. It's actually a good thing. Because when we don't talk about our successes, a lot of times we do that because we want to show up as humble. It's like, that's how I'm going to be likable, is I'm not going to brag. Okay, well, but here's the research on this, is that when you, like, let's say we're together and I have something really awesome that just happened that I share, but I don't tell you. And then you hang up, and of course you go on social media or somewhere else, the grapevine's super efficient, and you see that I have this success. Is your first thought what a humble person Alison is for not sharing that when we were just talking? Probably not. It's like, why didn't she tell me? Like, am I not in the inner circle? Or does she think I'm so lame that I couldn't be happy for her? So,
Or I was going
talk,
to get jealous if she
yeah,
told me,
right. I'll
right?
be so envious because my life is
Yeah.
so pathetic. And so talking about our successes, but also, so that's one thing, but we can do it in lots of different ways. So I'm a huge fan, and I use a lot in my own life, what I call dual, I don't call it's been defined in research as dual promotion. I call it brag and thank, which is I talk about something good that's happened to me that you may not know about. So I get to build my capabilities, perceptions of my capabilities with you because you're hearing this good thing. But I also, at the same time, acknowledge thanks and gratitude and credit for other people who contributed, to this. And that idea also builds warmth. So what research has shown is that that's a great example where lifting up yourself and lifting up other people at the same time is good for them and good for you. And it's actually really good for you because you get that warmth bump as well. You're not seen as immodest. So there's a lot of specific ways that we can do this. The other thing, I'll give you one more right now, is that we have to build our own status. We cannot abscond that responsibility, but other people can also be great and even better at building our status than we can if we do our part. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure, right, in your work, you get referred a lot, and a lot of people get referred to you, right? Someone will say, Chris is the person, right, you need to be talking to. And you'll get an email and someone say, I have your next great guest, or I have, another person that you need to be connected to. In those referrals, that person's status has been built for them by the kind words of another person. And that other person can be off the charts braggy about you without any consequence, negative consequence, right? To your warmth. They can just say, I mean, Chris is the best human I have ever met. Like, do not pass go, do not collect $200. You need to go right now and talk to Chris. You can't say it quite like that about yourself. I'm the greatest person you've ever met. So other people can really build our status, and it's nice when it happens, but what I try to get people to think about is how you can make it happen more often. And one of the ways you can make it happen more often that's also in service to others is you can promote them first. So anytime you have a person in your orbit and you think this person's amazing, talk them up, introduce them, say something positive about them, because people want to reciprocate. And so if you're talking them up, they want to talk you up so that they can even the psychological exchange. And that's a very positive behavior that we can put goodness into the world. And it's going to come back to us. But as we're doing it, we're also elevating other people. And so this is where I like to say authenticity and strategy are not opposites, right? Telling something you really believe that's good about another human being into the world, super authentic. But the strategy is reciprocity rules relationships. So it comes back to you. And those are the kinds of ways that I help people think about it doesn't have to be me or them. Me and building them is very possible, and it feels a lot more fun and something that people can get behind, right? Sometimes I might struggle to get somebody to promote themselves, but I never have to make a hard argument to say, hey, if you see someone doing a good thing, just comment on it. And they're like, oh yeah, that I could do.
And I'm smiling here as you're speaking because I'm thinking that you actually did that to me with Jeff Tetz, and I ended up being on his podcast afterwards. And it's like that thing of like sharing and lifting people up. And the thing that occurred to me there is you also have to be the kind of person that people want to lift up. Right. And so like I really I'm thinking back to our conversation today and before, where it's like, hey, you have to be the kind of person that brings so much warmth. And that warmth comes from lifting people up, but that warmth also comes from showing up for people and supporting people. And that warmth shows up from asking more questions and spending less time talking, right? And being interested. So what are some of those ways that people become the kind of person that people want to lift up? What are some of your tips there?
So a couple thoughts is one, people cannot lift you up if they don't know you exist. So I do harp on the idea of increasing our reach, meeting more people, because you and I were talking offline, right before we started, and both sharing stories about how random interactions in public transportation settings had gotten us great relationships because we were willing to chat up the person sitting next to us, like on the train or the plane. So one is get me expanding your reach because, like you and I, for example, as we've come to support each other, that only happened because you started with like a thumbs up on a post and then a comment and then who's this person? So that tell people to look for easy ways because you never know where the next person who could support you and build your status could come from. It's just as likely from the person standing next to you in the line at the grocery store than it is your boss or your colleague. And so that's one thing. Then the second thing is finding simple, small ways to add value to people, whatever it is in your world. Because anytime you show up as capable and caring, you have done something that's gonna build your status. So I'll give you an example that just happened to me in an event that I just did, a women's event. There was a woman there who was the unofficial, official, like Instagram documenter of the event. She's interviewing me, she's photographing B-roll. She's clearly doing this, but she's also an attendee. So I can't figure out how she gets this role, but she's clearly doing something on behalf of the conference. But she says, I'm a young woman and I care a lot about social media and everything, but how do I balance the authenticity of I really like this, but a lot of older people in my organization, they don't value it and they think it's like silly or like, it makes me less of a serious professional because I'm on Instagram. And I said, well, your Instagram isn't benefiting them right now. And so I said, but I can tell you, it's people who are like me, who don't know how to do it well, value this, but it's not valuable if I just see it, you doing it for you. But what if you did it for me? So I said, if you love Instagram and you're really good at it, well, how about next time there's a company event, you'd say, hey, I would love to take on the responsibility of documenting this so that I can showcase the great work we're doing to our industry as a whole. Now, with the same skills that you have that the other person could not do because they are, like me and don't know Instagram. Now your thing isn't silly anymore. It's not just benefiting you, it's benefiting everybody, but you love doing it. So therefore you can show up as distinct. So I always encourage people to think, what do I do well and like doing? And then how can I take that thing that's unique and bring it into service of others? And so I'll give you like one other example. When I was a young graduate student, when we would submit, this is still true, but when you'd submit manuscripts, you have to submit them according to the formatting guidelines of a particular journal. Okay, so in medicine might be AMA, but in psychology, APA is a big one. And they say the font of this heading needs to be this big, it needs to be left justified, it needs to be centered. It's just a whole bunch of memorization of rules. The book is this thick. Everyone needs to do it. No one wants to memorize it, but it's necessary. And so what did I do as a young graduate student? I just memorized the whole book. I'm a good memorizer, and I needed to do it myself. I wasn't going to ask anybody senior to do it for me. So I just learned the rules. And then when people couldn't figure out the rules, I said, "Oh, I know the rule, right? This needs to go here, this needs to go here, this needs to go here." Next thing you know, people who were senior, who I didn't really work with, were coming to my office because everyone told Allison knows all the formatting. Just go ask her and she'll tell you how to do it. And so, but it was an opportunity I took to take something that could anyone else have memorized the book? Sure. Did anyone? No. And the next thing you know, I have a skill that makes me useful, and I'm willing to stop what I'm doing for 5 minutes to turn to the person and tell them what to do and go back. And I didn't invest a lot because I was also doing it for me, but it brought me into contact with new people. And it was Allison's a helpful person. And I felt like I was able to build on that and ride that. And so that's what really the most important thing is. Once you meet the people, think about the authentic ways that distinguish you, where you can add value to your life. Because the surest way to get people to respect you is basically use your skills to solve their problem.
I love that. And especially as younger employees that are going into the workplace, trying to establish, trying to be seen within an organization, right? Where I don't want to work, I don't want to do the extra work, but yet I have the opportunity to be able to stand out by doing something simple. I was just, when you were sharing that, I was reminded of, I worked at Jewish Vocational Services during 2008 when the economy tanked. I was trying to get my business going. And I remember walking in and they had all this like just random artwork people had donated. And I went to the leader, I was like, why don't we have stories featuring the people that we serve here? And he goes, wow. I was like, can I do it? And I just went and I took photos. I interviewed people. I got the stories up. All that artwork came down and we put those up. He told that story, the CEO, at every single event for the 5 years that I was working there. Right. And then they brought me back later on to do it. But it was just like, it took me maybe an afternoon to do and a $500 budget. And then it
Yeah.
was unforgettable to the leader. And I had fun doing it. And people were proud and they saw their pictures up on the wall. And that was a simple win because I liked, I was an ethnographer by training. So let me use my skill in this random job I have to survive during an economic downturn.
Totally. I mean, and so anybody can add some value, and even in like less time than that. So I've been telling this lately. My son, who's my oldest son is 15. He went to a summer program, at Sleepaway academic program. He texts me after the first night and he says, "Mom, the leadership speaker here, I think she does a lot of what you do. Can I introduce you?" I said, "Absolutely." And he's texting me, "How do I do it?" And he's like, "Can I write your name and number on a piece of paper?" And so he's like, I mean, it's like step by step. Sure. He hands the paper. The woman says she's at first freaked out because she said, "In all my years, nobody's ever come up to me and said, 'I need you to talk to my mom.'" She thought something was wrong. But she says, "Sure." So she connects with me on LinkedIn. When I go pick him up, she says, "You want to meet for coffee?" Turns out we have a million things in common. We both serve women. She's amazing. And we're thinking about ways we can partner together in all kinds of things and lift each other up. And I said, the most important part of that story is that let's remember who made that value, who created that value. A 15-year-old boy, okay, who cannot drive, doesn't cook, doesn't put his clothes in the hamper. But you know what? If he can broker an intro that has value, and it took him all of 10 minutes to do, then everybody has something to offer. And so we have to start looking for it. And he felt really proud, right, too, of I did that. Like I actually, wow, like I know things that other can help other people. I said everybody can. So, like my 12-year-old is a whiz with his iPhone. Every time something goes wrong with his phone, he goes, "Mom, just let me fix it." So everybody has something that they can bring if they take that mentality of using it in service to other people.
I love it. Now, what rapid fire? What
Okay.
couple additional quick fire tips would you give to people who want to consciously improve their status, build relationships with people, and be that likable badass that we're talking about today?
Okay. One, this is a nod to your contribution to the book. One, please accept your compliments with a simple thank you. Um, do not do not start diminishing the good that you put into the world. Do not start drawing attention to all the ways in which the work product that you've done that is already great could be even better. As Julia Child always says, never apologize for the food you serve. Nobody knows how it's supposed to turn out but you. So if someone wants to criticize your stuff, let them do it, but you don't need to start telling them like, "I could have done this, I could have done this," right? No, let's not do that. Um, One swing thought, this is really important, is pick something that you think you could do a little better. Let's say do better at accepting compliments. Um, and focus only on that one thing until it becomes second nature. Do not give yourself a New Year's resolution list of 73 ways you need to change. It's overwhelming, it's demoralizing, and it's not necessary. So I would say that pick one thing that's easy and fun, so easy that you know you're going to crush it every day, and just do it. And then um, the other thing I would think about is look for people who are really great at showing up as likable badasses. And you may not know why, but you just know that person's got it. Like people, when that person speaks, they listen. People are able that, like I had a dean once who he could tell you no, and you would leave his office loving him more than you went in. And you're like, whatever that is, and however he did it, I need to bottle it. When you see somebody like that, learn from them, invite them to lunch or a Zoom, tell them that you really respect the way that they're able to show up, and try to ask them for how they do it. And they may not instantly know what they're doing, but if you show up with curiosity and ask a bunch of questions, you're going to learn a little bit about how they do it in a way that you can take something from it that you can model in your own life that will help you. Because all the people doing this all around us, everyday people, right? Not famous people, everyday people have something to teach us if we start to get curious about it, and they'll love to tell you. They're their own favorite subject. They just need your curiosity, and they'll do it. So those are some of my suggestions for how to get started.
I love it. And I think one suggestion we need to add is to make sure you get your copy of the book, Likable Badass. And two things that really stood out to me in reading it is, one is how practically useful it was, but also that it's just hilarious. Right? It's like a couple of lines. I'm not going to say what they are, but I literally was laughing out loud sitting at my kitchen table this morning, reading through the book. And I was like, it's fun to read. It's extremely useful. And it's a book that I'm buying today for my wife and daughter. Because I know my wife's going to read it first. And as soon as my daughter's old enough to understand it, she's going to be reading it, because everyone needs to have the tools and the skills to be able to navigate the dynamics that are there that hopefully are not going to be there 10 years from now, thanks to the work that you're doing. So thank you for connecting today.
I really appreciate it. I wanted it to be useful and positive. And my daughter, who's now 9, who has an illustration in the back of the book that we negotiated, she always says, make sure you tell people I drew that when I was 5, because I can draw a lot better now. And I don't want people thinking that's my best work. And I said, okay, I will make sure that disclaimer has been spread far and wide. Amazing. You're amazing. I could spend the whole day talking to you.
Same. And so where can people find you and your work, and what's the best way for them to connect with you and follow what you're up to in the world?
Yeah. So the best way, the catch-all, is to go to my website, AlisonFragale.com. But when you're there, there is an embedded page, place, like if you go to my book page, to sign up for my newsletter. My newsletter is called The Upper Hand. It is free. It's on Substack, so you're gonna scroll. There's a lot of stuff here. There we go. There's The Upper Hand. Okay, you put your name in there. That's just me. You don't get spammed. And it's called The Upper Hand. It's behavioral science to help women excel. But nothing that I talk about, including in this book, is ever just specific to women. And so I welcome everybody who's curious about it. That's going to be a really great way to stay connected. And then just below that, there are my social links. I know you and I are LinkedIn friends. I'm trying to get better on Instagram. But my website is going to give you all those kind of things. And perfect. I would love to hear from anybody and everybody who sees this and is curious.
And you need to definitely follow Alison on LinkedIn. She's absolutely hilarious. And the posts are always useful. They'll either make you laugh or give you something you can use. So Alison, thank you so much for taking the time to join today. And I look forward to talking again soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you.